The pass road was barred on the 9th night of the frost month. The men who barred it were not trying to keep anything in. They were trying to keep the valley out. Ashen Combe had heard the thing come down off the Sorrel Pass 2 nights before. They heard it strike the upper snowfield. They heard it not get up again. By the 2nd morning, the Reeve had made a decision on behalf of every soul in the valley. Every flock in the high folds came down in the dark. Ropes went across the Combe road at the washout. 2 men sat at the ropes in shifts, with a lantern and a cow horn. Their orders were 4 words long. Nobody goes up there. That is the crime this story begins with. I want it named properly, because the valley later called it caution. It was not caution. Caution would have been a watch set to warn the people coming down. That watch faced uphill. It was set to make certain that whatever lay at the top of the pass died alone, on a road nobody was allowed to walk. Corrow did not bring her flock down. She was 34 that winter. She kept 41 ewes in a low stone fold on the shoulder of the pass, 600 feet above the roofs of the village. There is an old fold saying in the Sorrel country: a shepherd who feeds a wolf has already sold her flock, and only the paying is left. It is a good saying. It is also a lie, told by people who have never had to decide anything at 4 in the morning, with a lamp in one hand. The saying assumes you know what you are feeding. It assumes the thing on the far side of the wall has a name, and a nature, and a plan for you. Corrow did not know what was lying up on the pass, neither did anybody else in that valley. That is the whole difficulty, and it never got simpler. You need to understand what hunger does to an animal that size. Everything else in this story stands on it. A wound is a fast problem. Hunger is a slow one, and the slow one is worse to look at. A wound has an edge. You can find it, wash it, pack it, and know by the 3rd day whether you have won. Hunger has no edge anywhere. The body begins to eat itself in an order, and the order never varies. Fat first, then muscle, from the hindquarters forward. The last muscle it takes is the heart. Long before it gets there, the gut has narrowed and gone quiet, so that when food finally comes, the animal can no longer accept it. A starved beast given a full manger dies of the manger, not of the hunger, of the meal. That is why it had to be one. One only. Every night. For as long as it took, a shepherd who did not know that would have killed the thing with kindness inside a week. Isa knew it because of an ox. 8 years before, a drover brought a beast over the pass so far gone you could have hung a lantern on its hip bones. The village was generous. The village fed it everything it had, and the ox was dead by the following noon in a byre full of good hay. Isa had told them to stop. She was ignored. She was 26 then, and a woman, and she only kept sheep. There is one more thing you need to know about her before we go up the hill. 11 winters earlier, in a bad thaw, the ice road took her boy. Tam was 11 years old. He went down to the combe with a message, and the road went out under him somewhere in the dark. She walked that road for 9 days looking for him, and did not find so much as a boot. That is why she did not flinch at a body in the snow. She had spent 9 days hoping to find one. It is also why she had no patience left for men in good coats, explaining what was reasonable. So, on the 3rd morning of the barred road, Corrow walked out of her own gate, and went up the pass to look. She took nothing with her. That part matters. No rope, no lamp, no offering, and no knife she did not carry every day of her life. She went up the way you go up to look at a slip in the track, at a walking pace, with her hands in her sleeves. The wind on the Sorrel Pass in the frost month will take the skin off your knuckles in an hour. It was lying in the call, where the old drove road flattens out. It had been there long enough that the snow had drifted against its ribs and made a fair job of burying it. She did not scream. She did not run. She did not know what she was feeding, because she had not yet decided to feed anything at all. What she did was what a shepherd does with a downed animal in a bad place. She walked the whole way around it once, slowly, at a distance, and read the ground. It had come down hard and slid. There was a gouge in the snowfield above, 40 feet long. It had crawled after landing. There were 2 long troughs where the forelimbs had pulled. It had not moved in a day and a night, because the drift against its ribs was old drift, wind-packed and crusted over. Then she read the thing that decided her. There was no blood. Not a spot of it, not on the snow, not on the scales, not in the troughs. Whatever had put it down had not cut it. It was thin. That was the fact of it. It was the size of a barn, and the width of a rail fence. The great flat plates along its side stood proud of the body, the way a starved horse's ribs stand proud of the hide. The hollows above its hips were deep enough to hold a hat. A dull orange seam ran under the scales at the shoulder, the color of a banked fire, and it was banked very low. Frost sat along the brow ridge and did not melt. Then the head turned, an inch and no more. One eye opened. It was amber, and it was the brightest thing on that whole white mountain. Corrow stood where she was, and looked back at it for a count of 10. That is a long time, on a pass, in a wind. "You're starved," she said. "That's all you are. That's the whole of it. There's nothing here a knife would fix." Then she turned and walked back down the track. She was already counting. Counting is what a shepherd does when she is frightened and has decided not to be. Let me tell you what a fold count is, because the word makes it sound like arithmetic, and it is not. A fold count is a shepherd's whole year, said out loud in one word. 41 ewes meant. That spring, perhaps 55 lambs. She would keep 12, and sell the rest at the combe fair in the 6th month. It meant 9 fleeces of clip beyond her own needs. It meant the rent on the high grazing, and the winter meal, and the roof over her head. A shepherd does not own 41 animals. A shepherd is 41 animals. When a man in that country wanted to know who you were, he did not ask after your family. He asked your count. Corrow's count that night was 41. She chalked it on the flat stone over her fold gate, the way she had chalked it every night for 11 years. The next night it was 40. She did it in the dark, before the moon came up, and she did it the hard way. On foot, alone, with a single ewe on a short halter and no dog. The dog would not come past the wall, and she was not going to make it. She picked the oldest of the 41, a broken-mouthed ewe who had given her 8 lambs and would not see another lambing. That is not sentiment. That is a shepherd choosing correctly. She had known that animal longer than she had known anybody in Ashen Combe. She walked her up the drove road for the better part of an hour. Then she did this small thing this whole story turns on. She led the ewe to within 20 feet of the head. She slipped the halter. She stepped back. And it waited. It did not lunge. It did not take the animal out of her hand. It lay with its jaw flat in the snow and its one amber eye on her, and it waited. It went on waiting while she backed off the full 20 feet and put the drove stone between herself and it. Only then did the head come forward. She stood behind the stone and listened to it eat. That took a long time. A starved animal eats slowly, or it does not eat at all. Then she walked home, rubbed out the chalk, and wrote 40. The next night, 39. I will be fair to Ashen Combe, because it would be easy not to be. They were not cruel people. They were 40 families in a stone valley with one road out, a hard year behind them, and a thing on the pass that nobody could put a name to. When the Reeve set that watch, he believed he was keeping children out of a snowfield. What I hold against them is not the rope. It is that when they found out, not one of them came up to see for themselves. They decided at the bottom of the hill what was true at the top of it, and they stayed content with that for 11 weeks. They found out on the 9th night. The man on the rope watched a lantern go up the pass and did not follow it. The Reeve came to her gate the next morning with 2 men behind him. He stood at the wall in his good coat and would not come in. "You're feeding it," he said. "I'm feeding a starved animal that came down on my grazing," Issa said. "One a night. It can't take more than one. Its gut is shut. You've a count of 39. 38 this morning. And when it's none, then it's none." "That is not an answer, Issa. It's the only one I have," she said. "Ask me about the weather and I'll do better." Then he told her the things a Reeve tells you, that the high grazing was let, not owned, and could be unlet. That a woman with no stock is a woman with no place. He was not shouting. That is the part she remembered afterward. He said all of it in the flat, reasonable voice men use when they have decided that a thing is your own fault. Then he went back down the track, and the 2 men went with him, and nobody offered her so much as a sack of meal. The fire is a liar, and the winter is not short. 31, on the 15th night. She wrote it with fingers so cold she had to breathe on them first. By then she had stopped taking a halter. The ewes walked up the drove road beside her, the way sheep walk beside a person they trust, which is badly, and with a great deal of stopping. She talked to them the whole way up. She talked to the thing in the call as well, once she got there. Not tenderly. She had no tenderness to spare that winter. She talked to it the way she talked to a ewe with a bad udder. She told it what was wrong with it. Ground's frozen 4 inches down, she told it. You'll not get warm lying on that. Move 8 feet to the rock, you'll have the sun off it in the morning. 3 nights later, it had moved 8 feet to the rock. That was the first flicker. She did not make anything of it. She was too tired to make anything of anything. What she noticed instead was smaller, and worse for her. It had begun to expect her. On the 19th night she came up the road well past her hour, because a ewe had cast a lamb early, and she had spent an hour and a half in the wet with her arm inside the animal. When she came over the rise, the head was already up and turned toward the track. It had been watching the road for her. You cannot feed a thing and stay strangers. That is not romance. That is animal husbandry. Every drover knows it, and every woman who has ever reared an orphan on a bottle in her own kitchen. 19. On the 23rd night. Now the count began to hurt. 19 ewes is not a flock. It is the memory of one. At 19 she stopped being a shepherd in the eyes of the valley, and started being a story. The wool factor's man came up in the 11th week to say there would be no advance against the clip that year, and he could not look at her while he said it. He left a quarter sack of oats on the wall. She did not touch it for 2 days out of pure temper, and then she took it inside. Pride is a thing you eat last, after the fat and the muscle, and before the heart. 12. On the 30th night, the east wall of her fold had gone soft, where the runoff came round the corner, and she told the animal about it on the way up, out loud, in the dark, as if it were a neighbor. That wall wants rebuilding from the footing, she said. I'll lose it in the thaw. There's no time, and there's no man in that valley who would come up and hold a stone for me now. 6. On the 36th night. At 6, she understood what she had actually done. She never once called it a sacrifice. That word belongs to the people who are watching. She thought of it as a debt she had entered into by accident on the first night, and could not now get out of honestly. If she stopped at 6, everything already spent had bought nothing, so she went on, for the same reason a shepherd goes out into sleet at 2 a.m, which is that the alternative is to have wasted the going out she did the night before. 3, 1. On the 41st night she took the last ewe up the drove road in a wind that came over the col sideways and through the snow flat. She did not talk on the way up. When she slipped the halter she stood there in the open, well inside the 20 feet, and did not go behind the stone. And it waited anyway. It lay with its jaw flat and its one amber eye lit, and it would not touch the animal until she had stepped back and put the rock between them. It did exactly what it had done on the first night, when it was so far gone it could barely lift its own head. 41 nights. It had never once taken a single thing out of her hands. Not once. It waited. Every time I have gone back and forth about which moment in this story is the important one, and I have settled on that one. Not the ridge. Not the reveal. That, a thing the size of a barn, starving for 6 weeks, that would not eat until the woman was safely behind the stone. She walked home, and rubbed the chalk off the lintel, and wrote nothing, because there was nothing to write. The fold was empty. The gate stood open. There was no longer any reason to close it. The dog went in and out of it, and could not understand what had happened to its work. That should have been the end of it. She had nothing left to bring. She went up anyway. The next night she walked the drove road with empty hands. She sat down on the drove stone in the dark, 10 feet from the head, and stayed until the cold in her feet frightened her. Then she went home. She did it again the night after, and the night after that. When there is nothing left to pay with, you pay with the sitting. I will not dress that up. She never did. On the 4th of those nights, the head came round and laid itself down in the snow on the windward side of her. The wind stopped. She understood that she had just been put in the lee of a building. She sat in that quiet for a long while. "You're mending," she said at last, in the voice you would use to a farrier. "Your seams are up. That's blood moving. In a month you'll want more than one a night, and I'll not have it to give you." On the 9th of those nights there was nothing in the call at all. No animal, no drift, no trough. The snow where it had lain was a long shallow hollow, already crusting over. The track above the call was scuffed and broken all the way up to the ridge. Corrow stood there with her lamp and looked at an empty place on a mountain. Then she walked home. She was 34 years old. She had 9 sheep hurdles, an empty fold, a broken wall, a dog with no work, and no count at all to chalk on the stone. The 10th dawn came up grey, and then, all at once, gold. She heard it before she saw it. What she heard was the one sound that Mountain had not made since the frost month began, which is the sound of a great many sheep on frozen ground. It is a knocking, a hard, irregular clatter of feet on ice, with the coughing and calling laid over it. She came out of the hut with her boots unlaced, and stopped in the mouth of the fold gate. The ridge above her was moving. They came down the ice track out of the white, out in a long, ragged string, 4 and 5 abreast where the track allowed it, packed and stumbling and steaming in the low sun. Behind them and above them, walking, came the animal. Its head was down at the level of the last of them. It was pushing. That is the only honest word for it. It was working the tail of that flock down a bad track, the way a good dog works a flock, without hurry, swinging its head to close the gaps. Every time an animal broke off toward the drop, it turned that animal back with the flat of its jaw. 40 head of winter stock, off the high drove roads, out of the storms of the 11th week. Animals the whole Sorrel country had written off in the first blizzard and never once gone looking for. They came down the last 100 yards in a rush, the way sheep do when they see a wall. The first of them through the gate went down in the trampled slush at her feet. Corrow went down on her knees in the open mouth of her own fold gate. She gathered it up against her chest, with both bare hands buried to the wrist in the wet fleece. She did not look up at the ridge. She did not look at the 4 figures who had come up from the rope watch and were standing back along the stone wall, with their hands at their sides, not helping. She looked down at the animal in her arms and felt along its brisket for the temperature of it, because that is the first thing you do. Her sleeves were soaked to the elbow before she had finished with the first one. The rest came through the gate around her like water round a stone. And the animal came down off the track. It put its head to the ground beside her at the height of her shoulder, jaw flat in the snow, mouth closed, one amber eye open and turned on her. Then it lay itself down across the open gateway of the fold, and would not move. It would not move for the noise. It would not move for the dog. It would not move for her hand on its brow ridge. It lay across the gate, with 40 head of stock behind it, and Corrow kneeling in front of it with a ewe in her arms. The sun came up over the Sorrel Pass and lit the whole of it like a lamp. Along the wall, 4 men from Ashen Combe watched it happen and did not come one step closer. It moved when she opened the gate the rest of the way. Not before. She counted them in twice, out loud, in the trampled snow, in the order they came through. 39, 40, not 41. 40, she had put out 41, and 40 came back. I have thought about that number for a long time, and I will come to it at the end. By the middle of that morning, half the valley was on the track, hats in their hands, their eyes going everywhere, except at the long, dark shape lying along her wall in the sun. Every one of them wanted the same thing. They wanted to look at the ears, because the 40 were marked. Every one of them carried a pitch mark on the near shoulder, a closed ring with a single bar through it, and every one was notched twice on the off ear. There was not a man on that mountain who had ever seen that mark on a living animal. The stock warden came up from the coast road on the second day, with a mule and a green ledger. A stock warden's brand book is a sworn record, and his entry for that morning survives. He read it out on the track, in front of everybody, in the voice they use. Mark 17, he read, closed ring, 1 bar, near shoulder. Ear notched twice, offside. Reserved mark. No sale, no transfer, no slaughter, no keeping, by any hand but the hand that holds it. Then he closed the book, and said the thing that everybody there had already worked out. 40 head of reserved stock in a private fold is not a fine, he said. That's an assize matter. That's a rope. The valley went very quiet. The Reeve was standing there in his good coat, and he did not say one word in her defense, and I have decided to let that stand without comment. They walked down off the pass on their own feet, Issa said. Ask the 4 men at the wall. They watched them come. Nobody at the wall said anything. The warden's man went to the gate to begin turning the 40 out onto the track. He got about 4 steps and stopped. The animal had stood up. It did not roar and it did not strike. I want to be exact about this, because the version they tell in Ashen Combe now has fire in it, and there was no fire. It stood up off the wall. It walked 4 paces. It lay down again across the gateway, jaw in the snow, eye open, between 40 head of reserved stock, and every man on that mountain. And it stayed there. That was all. That was the whole of it. And it was enough. The warden's man came back very carefully. The warden closed his ledger and sat down on the wall and said, to nobody in particular that he had been 40 years in the service, and had never once had to write down a thing like this. They sent a rider east down the coast road that night, and then there was nothing to do but wait for him. Those were 6 long days, and the valley did not go home. They camped along the wall in the cold, waiting to see what the law would do about a woman and a gate. The animal did not move off the gateway once in all that time. Corrow worked around it. She watered the 40 out of a leather bucket twice a day, because the trough was inside the gate, and the gate was under a jaw the size of a cart. The warden watched her do it from the wall. "You know what that is," he said, on the 4th day. "I know it's carrying a wall's worth of frost, and it hasn't eaten in 11 days, she said. "That's what I know." On the 7th day, something came up the combe track on foot, in the snow, with no men behind it at all. I will not describe him. I will tell you only the one fact that matters. The animal was not lying along her wall when he came, and it had not been there since first light, and Corrow noticed that, before she noticed anything else. The stock warden went down on his knees in the wet snow, and said a word out loud. Then the Reeve said it. Then a woman at the back of the crowd said it. After that the whole of Ashen Combe was on its knees in the slush of the drove road. Corrow was standing up in the mouth of her fold gate, with her sleeves pushed back, and her hands wet, because she had been feeling a hogget's brisket when the kneeling started, and she had not finished. She did not catch the word. She has said so herself, and I believe her. She was watching the sheep. He walked past all of them. He did not stop at the Reeve. He did not stop at the warden. He did not say one word about the rope watch, and I want you to hold on to that, because a lesser story would have had him take that valley apart. He went to the wall of the fold, and he counted the sheep. He counted them the way she had, out loud in the order they stood, and it took him a while. 40, he said. 40, Issa said. I put out 41. He looked up at the empty chalkstone over the gate for a moment. Then he said, Your east wall will go in the thaw. It wants rebuilding from the footing. That was when she knew, and the knowing went through her like cold water. She did not scream. She did not kneel. She did not say one word about it then, or ever afterward. She had told that to no living soul but a starving animal, on a pass, in the dark. So now I will give you the word the warden said in the snow, since she had it at last, and so do you. He said, Emperor. He told the warden to write, and the warden wrote. The entry in the green ledger for that day reads, 40 head, mark 17, moved and delivered by the hand that holds the mark. No offense found. Then he went back down the combe track on foot. Alone he did not offer her a house, or a purse, or a place, or a name, and he did not ask her for anything either. He was a bystander to a decision already made without him. On a mountain, by an animal, in the snow. The thaw came late and hard, exactly as she had said it would. She rebuilt the east wall herself, from the footing, over 11 days in March, alone for the first 4 of them. On the 5th morning 2 men from Ashen Combe came up the track and stood at her gate. Where do you want us? One of them said. She told them where to put their hands, and they put them there. She never mentioned the rope watch. They never mentioned it either. That is how it is done in a stone valley. It is not forgiveness, exactly, but over enough years it does the same work. The 40 stayed, and nobody ever came for them. The pitch mark faded out of the fleece by the 2nd clip, and after that they were only sheep. She lambed 52 that spring and lost 4, a good year in any country. In the 6th month she took 19 down to the combe fair, and came home with a new gate and boots that fit her. The wolf actor's man shook her hand at the trestle and called her Mistress Corrow, which he had never done before, and in the evenings, when the flock came down off the day, grazing to be counted through the gate, there was a long dark shape lying along the outside of the east wall in the last of the sun. Jaw flat, eye half shut, a thin steam coming off its back. Corrow worked around it the way you work around a tree that stood there before you did. She never named it out loud, not to a neighbor, not at the fair, not to anybody. Strangers came up the track that summer and stopped dead in the road. In the name of everything, one of them said, "What is that?" "It's mine," Issa said, and went back to work. After a while the valley stopped asking and learned to walk on the far side of the road. None of it undid the 9 days on the ice road. Nothing undoes those, but there is a difference between a woman alone on a mountain and a woman on a mountain. It was the whole of what she got. Every night, when the last of them was through the gate, she went to the flat stone over the lintel, rubbed out the chalk, and wrote the count. And after that spring, the count was always one more than the number of sheep standing in the fold. She never explained it, and nobody who saw it ever asked. 41. I have wondered for a long time why it brought her 40 and not 41, and I have come to believe it was not short a sheep. It knew exactly what it owed. It had counted, the way she counted, every night for 41 nights. It brought back everything it had taken except the one. Then it came down and lay along her wall for the rest of its life. That is where the 41st went. So when people in the Sorrel country tell this story, they tell you about the ridge, and the sheep coming down out of the white out, and the warden on his knees. All of that happened. I do not think any of it is the important part. The important part is the ordinary time afterward. The wall rebuilt from the footing. The gate that swung true, the count going up again through the years. 40, then 50, then 63, and always the extra one on the end of it in chalk, written by a woman with cold hands in the dark, for a thing that had waited every night until she was safely behind the stone. Now let me ask you the question I have been carrying since the 9th night of the frost month, when the rope goes across the road in your own valley, and the reasonable men explain to you in their reasonable voices exactly why nobody is going up there. What is it, do you think, that decides which one of you walks up the hill anyway?